Guys,
Okay, fantastic. You ready to go here, sir?
I am ready to rock and roll.
That's fantastic. Okay, folks, this is Ross Evans. I work for Navionics. We put these webinars on very, very frequently. You can find them on our website. We are just extremely excited to have Tim Horton here tonight. Most of you, well, unless you live under a rock, you know what happened this weekend. The man won a BASS Elite tournament. This was on the schedule for about a month. We couldn't have picked a better timing situation. So, Tim, by all means, you know, we're excited to have you here tonight. We really appreciate it. And we're going to do something a little bit different, folks, just so you know. Tim's got some presentation for you, but don't worry too much. There's going to be tons and tons of question opportunities. On your devices, you have a question and answer area. Please write your questions down. I'm going to interrupt Tim as he's talking. We're going to try to go over the tournament. We're going to try to go over all the stuff, the migration, the fish migrations that was the original subject until he won the tournament. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And go from there. Tim, you've got your first slide up. It's all yours. Please take over.
Yeah, guys. Hey, thanks for having me on, Ross. Glad to be here, part of Navionics and Bass Pro and Ray Marine for hosting this tonight. So it's going to be a cool deal. And, you know, what we're going to do, guys, we're going to take you guys through the seasons. And one of the biggest challenges that we face is how fish move and being able to relocate them and really trying to just be educated on that. As far as what them little green creatures are doing all the time that frustrate us more often than not, and just trying to figure out what the bass are doing. But what we've got here is a lipless crankbait. This is a Shaker Z in the Aztec color. But you know, when we get out and are trying to locate fish in a pre-spawn situation, I tell people all the time that, you know, my biggest thing that I like to do is get my Navionics chip, put it in, and highlight my shaded area to about 5 to 10 feet. And I want to try to find as many big spawning flats as I can possibly find. What this is going to tell me is number one, I'm getting in the right area for where these fish are going to be trying to spawn, but also more importantly, you're going to find locations where the bigger numbers are going to be. And what happens is, if you take a lake like Lake Guntersville and you look at the mouth of Browns Creek, or you look at the mouth of Mean Creek or North Saudi, or let's take Lake Okeechobee where we just were, and you take those areas such as South Bay and Pelican Bay down south, and then you get up north around the Harney Pond area or Buckhead Ridge, those huge spawning flats are where the majority of the fish are going to live because successful spawns have happened there. You know, you can really, bluffy areas are great in the wintertime, pre-spawn areas, but when I really want to find the huge congregations of fish, that's what I'm going to do. And if these lakes have vegetation in them, like a Lake Seminole or a Toledo Bend down around 6 Mile or Houston and Lake Chickamauga, Pickwick, Guntersville, you know, all over that have the hydrilla and the milfoil, this is where a lipless crankbait is really going to come into effect. And I'm going to cover a lot of water with it and really let that lure, you know, move slowly and pump it and try to rip it out of the grass. But one of the big keys and techniques is to be able to try to find those windows. You know, down at Lake Okeechobee in the tournament we just had down there, and all of the reed heads that we were fishing, there were a lot of windows. It wasn't solid. You can find reeds all over that lake, but when you find them that grow in patches, in other words, it would be like you know, clumps of it growing, and you'd have an area maybe the size of your table, and then another area maybe the size of you know, how big a room is in your house, and then maybe another area the size of your vehicle, and then just smaller isolated clumps about the size of a nightstand, really mixed all throughout an area. And all of those windows is what a bass has to have. He has to have that for several things. He has to have that clearing to be able to spawn, and he also has to have it to be able to ambush prey. And in the lipless crankbait, I know we did a show at Lake Seminole several years ago, and the whole key was finding those holes in that grass. And you may have a clean, and I say holes, but it really is a clean area that may be 20 feet circumference. and that's really where those bass locate. So that's what I'm going to do in the spring of the year. And guys, we're going to just take this through the seasons and talk about how fish move. And, you know, we could spend hours on one season, but we want to try to get through this and get some questions and break it down to the best we can. So we'll be able to get those questions in here in just a little bit as well. The other thing is the biggest question that we get asked, and really the toughest thing that we deal with is when to move, when to make an adjustment, and when to leave an area when they're really biting. And when it slows down, and when not to make a move. You know, I had one of those big decisions on Sunday down at Lake Okeechobee. I knew the wind was going to blow. It blew on day 2, but it had more of an easterly direction to it than it did on day 4. And that place was not protected at all, and it got really muddy. So just a frustrating situation after getting all the way down there, running the rim ditch an hour and a half down there. But I had to make a decision, you know, and it was a win or lose decision to stay down there and try to find something, or make a move to an area where I felt like I knew I could catch fish. And bass they move for several reasons. They're going to move versus the biggest thing that they've always got to have is where is the food? They've got to have food, with the exception of the spawn. The spawn is going to dictate that a little different, just like a big buck during the rut. You know, he's not as concerned about food as he is, you know, doing the deal, so to speak. But a bass during the spawn is one situation that makes it a little different. Now, you know, I heard Rick Clunn say one time, if you want to study the owl, you know, you study the mouse. And it's the same thing with bass. If you really want to learn what they're doing, you study the shad and the crayfish and what they're doing that they feed upon. As we get into the late spring, I think we've got a topwater slide here, but one of my favorite times of the year is post-spawn. And this is really when you'll see on the deck of the boat 10 or 15 different rods. You'll see some shallow stuff for the morning time, getting into some deeper stuff in the later evening. But this is the time of year when I can really cover a lot of water with top water. The water temperature is warming up. Most everything that, with the exception of crayfish, and they can tolerate anything that swims is in fresh water, is going to like a water temperature from 65 to 75 degrees. And when that surface temperature is at that stage, those bass are going to come up in it. The brim are going to live there. The shad are going to live there. And that's just where those fish are going to be. So that's a cool spotted bass pick from Smith Lake there. Catching them on top water is a lot of fun. But, you know, I think the biggest thing in post-spawn is recognizing those bass that are coming out and getting ready to get offshore and being able to find that transition area in between. Now that can be secondary points as you're coming out into the lake, and it also can be boat docks that are on a little bit steeper bank as you're coming out before the fish come out into the main lake. So this is the time of year you got a lot of different rods on the deck and you're really covering water. Now as we get into the summertime, we may have some crankbaits or some different things here, I think, Ross, but punching. Yeah, here's a great photo. This is a lake that's actually just north of Lake Okeechobee called Lake Kenansville. And you can see the matted vegetation back there behind. That's a little bit thicker than what we were fishing at Okeechobee this week. This is a typical Florida stream, man. Look how black he is. When they get under those mats, man, they really, really get dark and just really cool. But you know, two things are going to happen in the summertime. You know, if you're on a lake that has thick vegetation that's going to mat up, this is a presentation right here that you got to be able to do. If you're on Sam Rayburn or Seminole, you know, those guys that drop those big heavy jigs, down at Guntersville, this happens up the upper end of Kentucky Lake when the grass grows there. We kind of been missing it the last year or two, but and then even down in Florida, punching that heavy cover, getting the right equipment, getting the gear. That bass right there, a cool thing about that shot, that bass was on this show, I think aired a few weeks ago, but that bass there was on the opposite side of this mat that's in the background there. When I set the hook, that bass come up and the whole mat just started going crazy. And it took me a second or two to realize there was a gator there just under the surface that I didn't realize. And he shot out of there. I thought I had me a 20-pounder on the way the way the mat was shaking everywhere. But anyway, just a really cool deal. And then offshore cranking. I'm gonna touch on that just a minute here, because it's my absolute favorite thing. Do we have a crank? Yeah, that's a cool double. That picture is actually from up in Minnesota. You know, a lot of people think southern reservoirs are the deal with deep cranking, but man, you got largemouth and you got them schooled up. You can really get that deal going anywhere. And we had done frustrating thing about that. We had done put the camera up and was just playing when that one hit. And this is another thing that gets tricky out there. You know, when you catch something like that, you think I'm fixing to catch them and catch them and catch them. Never caught another fish off of that little spot right there where that double was, which is ironic. Usually when you catch two, you really hit a big school. But anyway, just a real cool deal. And that there's a Z-Boss 20, the crankbait that we designed. It's just one of my favorites. But this is when I really got my Ray Marine and my Navionics chip, and I'm taking it into full force, and I'm taking it to a whole nother level of not even stopping to make a cast until I see fish, and looking for those big schools of fish and where they're located, and looking at my mapping and seeing where those contour lines, where those big flats come out, and those contour lines may be tight on one side or the other. And that's really what I'm going to look for when trying to locate these offshore fish. And you can tell by looking at those fish are down there deep. They're a little bit more opaque and just filled out, man. They're down there eating hard and just really, really full. But that was and here's another one. This is from Lake Falcon, the opposite end. I mean, you're talking complete opposite end of the United States, from the northern parts of Minnesota all the way down to almost Mexico. And crankbaits really are the lure of choice that you'll see guys using on tour. You know, we seen KVD win at Toledo Bend last year and just catching quality fish. They will absolutely catch the biggest fish in a school. And guys, I tell people this all the time, that, you know, when I first got into fishing, David Fritz was, and I'm loving seeing David back out on tour with us this year. You guys haven't noticed that, by the way, really cool. But, you know, David was really dominating the sport. And catching them on deep diving crankbaits. And I'm just getting out of college, and I'm thinking, man, I go out and I throw them a little bit. And I'm thinking, man, I don't know about this. It seems like, you know, that worm is a whole lot easier to fish than this big plug. But guys, they flat out catch the biggest fish when they're offshore. You'll catch the biggest fish in a school and get them fired up and be able to catch them over and over. And the biggest thing about it too, you can really cover a lot of water. And when those fish get offshore in the summertime, there's not a better lure to find them. And let's talk real quick about why bass get offshore. They're going to do one of two things. They're either going to get into heavy vegetation if it's in the lake, the way that we looked at that Lake Kenansville picture a while ago, or they're going to get, you know, offshore and schooled up. And they're going to do that because the shad move deep. The shad is more of a fragile fish than a bass. A bass is very adaptive. But in reality, the largemouth bass is a shallow water creature. They would rather be shallow year round. But when the bait fish go out deep in the summertime, that's where they're going to go as well. And they're going to follow them out there. And that's when you can just have so much fun. I know Kentucky Lake and Pigwick Lake and Gunnersville and a lot of the lakes that I fish, there's nothing better than catching them.
Hey,
and
Tim,
those dominate. Yep.
Hey, Tim, we got a question that came in on this specific thing. And just so you guys know, I'm monitoring the questions. We're going to let Timmy's going to hang out with us as long as he can, try to get as many questions when we're done here. But this question came up, and maybe you want to touch on kind of your setup for these deep crankbaits. One gentleman in particular is commenting that he has actually visually seen scratch marks on his crankbait, and he simply is not feeling them. So he's really feeling like maybe it's a rod thing, maybe it's a line thing. Walk us through kind of how you're doing that deep crank deal, because I know it's a really important thing for you.
Yeah, I think obviously having the right setup is the most important thing. And obviously very sharp hooks, guys. Keep an eye on those hooks, especially if it's a crankbait you've used a good bit. That front hook in particular will dull up a whole lot quicker, because this one hitting all the action with the way a lure, you know, stays pointed downward. But the setup that I use, I have a 711 Ducket rod that I designed. That's just my favorite cranking rod. It has a good action to it, and I use that Lew's BB1 Pro. There's nothing more important in deep cranking than being able to just absolutely launch a lure and get that distance, because deep cranking is basically, if you think about the geometry of it, when you make a long cast, that lure has got to spend 1/3 of the time diving down, 1/3 of the time in the strike zone, and then 1/3 of the time coming back to the boat. So you want your third to be as long as it can possibly be, and the length of the cast creates that to get that angle, you know, with your line and getting it down there. The other part of that I would tell, you know, the listener is I see people so many times when they make a cast, they've got their body turned sideways and the rod is sticking out here and bowed up. What I like to do is point my rod, the rod tip, exactly to that lure as I'm winding it back in, and I'm pointing it at it all the way. That way, when that fish takes that lure, there is direct resistance that's going to set the hook into that lure, to where if that rod's giving, it's not going to happen. Now, when I do get a strike, I load up and turn and come sideways as I'm fighting the fish in, because I want that rod to give and take as I'm fighting that fish. And it also is going to, really take that torque and that resistance. This is after a hook set here. That's a great photo of it. And a hook set on a deep diving crankbait is not a, there's a bite, reel up, set to hook. It's really just you're reeling, got that rod pointed, you get the bite, and then it's just coming back and continuing to reel, speed up your retrieve. So that's the scenario there with how that happens. But I think the biggest thing, you know, is to keep that rod pointed and just come back and load up. But it's going to happen. It's amazing how a bass can take a lure and inhale it and spit it back out. Line is also a big key. I use 12-pound Bass Pro Shops XPS fluorocarbon. That fluorocarbon has less stretch than monofilament. I don't recommend monofilament when deep cranking. It has so much stretch to it. That could be the problem of not feeling those strikes as well. All right, and we'll roll on into fall a little bit, and then we're gonna get into some questions. I see we got a bunch of them lined up here. When we get into the fall of fishing, you know, transitioning from crankbaits, and we'll kind of throw fall and winter back into there. I like the topwater fishing in the fall. You know, we looked at that slide earlier from the springtime, but topwater fishing is great in the fall as well. And here's what happens with that scenario. I like to really look for the backs of the pockets, and this is the time of year you really want to watch the wind forecast, because what happens with a shad, when that water temperature gets to the right temperature that they want to be in, they're going to come to the surface. And a shad is always swimming. They have to swim to survive. They have to swim to breathe, and they have to swim to filter, you know, the algae and whatever is in the water that they're filtering and eating, to be able to survive. So when they come to the surface, they're going to continue to swim. And it's just like anything else. If you took a bunch of wind-up toys and you put them in a room with no furniture, they're eventually going to get piled up in a corner, just from basic going around and getting stuck. Kind of like a robot that cleans the pool. It's always stuck in a corner somewhere, you know, and that's what happens with shad. And that's why they get piled up into these bays and back in these corners, and watching that wind forecast to move them as well. And then as you get into the wintertime, you know, a jig is really hard to beat. It's just, this looks warm, but that picture is actually in December. And being able to find those, you know, find those deep fish on a football jig, to me, if you're on Lake Hartwell, if you're on Pickwick Lake, anywhere throughout the country, the Savannah chain, a football jig is absolutely phenomenal. Now, this is a time of year, too, that bass are going to get in guts a lot more than maybe river ledges. They're going to, if there's a certain depth that they want, let's say that magical depth is 20 feet, or on Table Rock Lake it may be 30 feet, they're going to get into the backs of those drains and the backs of those cuts. So you go to the back of the creek and you find the very last depth at 15, 20, 25, 30, whatever depth you're seeing the most activity on, and that's a great way to catch them in the wintertime. Also, you know, drop shots, fishing vertical, looking at them on the Ray Marine unit, things like that work as well too. Guys, I use the Navionics chip on everything I do, and so much of it plays a role in, you know, you may see a bay that's just flat, and that's not where they're going to congregate up in the wintertime. And then you may see one that has just a sharp ditch running through the back center of it. And those, by visually looking on land, those two creeks look exactly the same, but I can look at my chip here and I can see which one has the contour and the cuts and the bends in it, and that's where the bass is going to be, because that bottom has a lot more firm rock in it. If you think about water flow and how a creek is formed, when it hits rock, it's going to turn. If it's just a sandy or just a mucky bottom, it's just going to flow, and you're not going to have a whole lot of contour and a whole lot of transition in it. So, well, Ross, let's get to some questions, man. I know.
Yeah. Okay. Guys, I'm blown away with the amount of questions we got, so I'm going to do my best. I'm going to combine some questions. I apologize if I don't get your exact specific question, but I'm going to try to combine some. Okay, the one thing that keeps coming back up this season specifically, and the first question was from Craig, and he was talking about Florida, about how the water temperatures have been a little above normal. We've also got some additional questions of guys asking throughout the country, are you feeling like because it was such a mild winter, will that move the spawn up, or will their winter haunts maybe be different into pre-spawn? I'm combining a couple questions here, Tim, but I just want to get your feel on just having abnormal water temperatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great questions, and that's a scenario we're having to look at as far as the pro anglers on tour with where all we're going this year, because you get a preconceived notion. You know, let's say we're going to Toledo being in April. I can promise you it's going to be further along than what we're used to seeing there the first week of April, and that's pretty much with everywhere. And it definitely will speed it up. You hear so many people talking about, you know, well, our bass spawn on Pickwick in the middle of April. Well, that is the target time. But I've been there at the end of March when we had a really warm winter and bass are spawning everywhere on the lake. And then I've seen it where we had a real cold winter and you find fish in mid-May still spawning. And one thing about the spawn that I think a lot of people don't realize is it happens for a month. At Lake Okeechobee, it will actually start. Lake Okeechobee is one of the rare places that it gets cold enough to spawn. And it will actually start in October, and you'll even still find fish there spawning in March and April. So, you know, it's just it's a little bit of a different place, a little bit of a different animal. But for the most part, these places they really do speed up earlier when we have a warm winter like we've had here. It makes for cool wintertime fishing too. When you're, you know, here at home, you know, we got water temperatures in the mid to upper 50s, and you're talking about late March water temperatures, and it's been that way all through February. So you can get up shallow, crank them, and all kind of things. It's really cool.
Okay. Now, kind of going on those same type of things, we had some questions about locating spawning flats, but also how do you locate? I mean, Rob was asking about how are these bass migrating in Florida, and then we had opposite questions where we're talking about highland reservoirs, where they're going into spawning flats and there's either no flats like there is on Table Rock, you know, everything's so steep, or everything is flat down in Florida. How are you locating a spawning flat to target, Tim?
Yeah, it's relative. You know, at Table Rock, you're not going to find as much of it, but you're still going to find it. You know, when you look at Table Rock Lake, for instance, and you see areas where you see a certain bay that just has a lot more flat area. In Table Rock, the buckbrush gives it away. When you see lots of buckbrush coming off the shore, even if the water is not at full pool, that gives it away that is a much flatter bank, much flatter area. You're not going to find the massive flats like you do at Okeechobee. And at Okeechobee, it can be flat out intimidating. You're talking about 300,000 acres, and the entire shoreline has reeds on it everywhere you go, maybe with the exception of some of the east side of the lake. But it's just amazing at looking at that. But I think you have to narrow down. In Florida, the situation is finding a sandy bottom. You know, that's really and just going. I'm talking about just putting the motor guide on high and just going and trying to find as many areas as you can get bit as possible, and then really slowing down. And then you take a place like you know, Lake Chickamauga or Kentucky Lake or somewhere that does have the big spawning flats, and that's basically where you're going to go and start looking for them. But the big thing about the spawn also, guys, it's not just finding the flats, it's finding the cover. A bass, in particular a largemouth bass, has got to have cover. He's going to spawn up close to something almost all the time, whether it's vegetation, wood, a boat dock piling, or something. Okay.
This came up a number of times. I know I live in Minnesota, so I'm always interested in this. We had a question from Eric, and he's asking about basically how some of these patterns change when you're dealing with natural lakes in the north.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you, northern fishing is so underrated. We go up there and film almost every year. We did 2 or 3 shows in Minnesota this year. We've been to Maine, but I think one thing. The photo we had up of the double a while ago, that was a place called Green Lake, and it was such a good lake. We stayed there a few days, back when this one here, and we did a deep cranking show offshore. And we went back a few days later and said, man, I want to give these boat docks a try. And the bass were loaded on the boat docks. Now, granted, if a tournament was happening, I think the tournament would have been won offshore on that lake. The fish were not quite as big as they were on the docks, but they were still loaded on them. And you're going to see that if you watched Bassmaster Live this past weekend at Lake Okeechobee, you've seen guys doing different things. Ott was telling me he caught almost a 9-pounder on day one on a frog. I never picked up a topwater lure or a frog or anything in my primary area and fished it there. And there's so many. I think we sometimes get caught up into, we hear a tournament was being won in a certain way and that's what you got to go out and do. It's not. Fish your strengths. We talked about a largemouth can live anywhere. You can go to, we talked about Table Rock earlier. You can literally go there in June and catch fish up the river in 5 foot of water when you can find the stain, and then get out in 35 and 40 and catch those spotted bass out of the deep timber. So in the clear water and the lower end. So I think it's really about going out and doing what you like to do and trying to make it work.
Okay. Got a number of questions related to this type of subject. Are you focused on water temperature for that spawn and then also for that fall transition? Or are you looking for other indicators beyond just the water temperature? And what water temperature are you looking for? If it is water, the temperature you're looking for.
Yeah, we'll start with the first one, which is the spawn. And it's most definitely water temperature. And it's water temperature in the morning. I'll tell people, it's 62 to 64, you better start looking up shallow. That's where they're going to be at spawning. But if it's hitting that late in the evening and in the winter, in the nights, or cooling it back down into the upper 50s, they're not going to start yet. But when you put your boat in the morning and it's 62, 64 degrees, they're going to be getting with it. I mean, it's that time of year. It's going to be happening, and that will last on up until the mid to upper 70s. You'll still see bass spawning, and there are other factors. The moon will definitely get things going more. The days getting longer will get the bass to leave the deep waters and come up shallow even when it's still cold. We've caught them at Lake Guntersville before, 41, 42 degree water temperature on a Shaker's End, 3 foot of water, and just smoking it. And those days getting longer trigger those fish to come up and get shallow because it's just Mother Nature. They know the spawn is coming. But that water temperature is the biggest thing. Fall transition, sometimes some things happen a little different. And here's what I mean by that. You can go to Pickwick Lake at the end of August and have the warmest water temperatures of all year long, and there will not be as many fish offshore deep as there is in June. June will have a lot more fish, even though the water temperature's not quite as warm as it is in August. So it's not always a water temperature thing. If you don't have the flow, if you're starting to get a drought the way they do in August, those bass will actually go find more oxygen and more cooler water coming from the back flows of the shallower tributaries that come out, and you'll find fish moving to the backs of the creeks already than you do hanging out in the main river. And that's really just a shad thing and following them. And another thing that happens is the shad is the primary forage, especially in the South. And the new shad that hatch out in June and July, they don't have the swim bladder to go down deep. They're going to stay on the surface all day long, and they're easy prey for the bass. So you're going to see August and September, those water temperatures still warm, and those bass are coming to the surface, eating on the new shad that have hatched out. And so the food really indicates it a little bit more in the fall of the year, and water temperature a little bit more of the spawn in the spring of the year.
Okay. Got a number of questions kind of tied together. How far do you feel like bass will migrate to do a spawn? Or, are those fish, and I'll ask it for my own personal use, are those fish essentially living near a creek their whole lives, or do you feel like they're traveling miles to do the spawn, miles to do a fall pattern, miles to do a winter situation?
Yeah, it's definitely not a migratory fish the way a salmon and some other fish are, but in the clearer the water, the more a fish will move. There's been a lot of studies on this where people will tag a fish and track it, and it'll move 20, 30 miles throughout the year sometimes. And I think that's just a fish moving around hunting food. And, and he, especially in clear water now, in muddy water lakes or rivers, the Ohio River, different places like that, a bass is going to get in an area and get up against something, and it's going to stay there. It's going to stay on that cover, and it may live its entire life within a mile stretch. Whereas if you have a clear water lake, the way Bull shows or some of the other ones are, then you're going to have, I apologize, labs. Sounds like it's attacking somebody.
Nothing wrong with dogs.
But, yeah, nothing like it. But you're going to have a situation where the fish are going to move a whole lot more in clear water situations.
Okay. I do have a couple of questions. Terry's one of them. Wondering about tidal situations.
Oh, yeah.
You mentioned, your migrations and how you're transitioning your fish. Basically his question is do most of those fish in those tidal situations, because they're in a river, stay shallow and there's really not an offshore bite? Or, he was asking about the Potomac River, but a couple people asked about, I apologize, guys, I can't find the couple others, but basically tidal rivers.
Yeah, I almost think those bass in tidal rivers know where to live at low tide, and they know where to live at high tide. And here's what I mean, and I'll give the Potomac River, for example. When I won there in '99, it was in October, and there was very little vegetation. So there was actually an offshore bite. I won that tournament on an offshore rock pile. But George Cochran was fishing in Belmont Bay along with myself. And at high tide, he really caught fish on lay-down trees that were within that bay. And at low tide, there wasn't enough water on them. I didn't catch them good at high tide. And at low tide, I was way offshore fishing a rock pile that would just get loaded up. And I'm convinced it was the same fish that were moving. They, when that cover, they look forward to that high tide and getting up in those lily pads or those lay-down trees and getting up there and ambushing. And then at low tide, they have to come back out and they still want to get up against something. So I'm really convinced that those fish will move, in those tidal river situations. And that's one of the biggest mysteries, of fishing for us. That can be a challenge when we go to the Potomac River or we go to the St. Johns River, the Mobile Delta, any of these tidal river systems. Do you run the tide, or do you try to find where the fish move in between? And that can be a real tricky situation. But man, I love fishing them tidal rivers. I love how those fish get right up against that cover, and the current really. You'll fish for 2 hours without a bite, and you'll hit a window on the Chick at the James River or somewhere that you just crush them for about 20 minutes. It's really a cool deal. Venice, Louisiana. I talk to people about that's one of the coolest places you'll ever go. It's just loaded with bass. It's phenomenal. But tidal rivers can be tricky, and they definitely move. Now, sometimes they may just pull out and hold and wait for the tide to come back up to get there, but you have a lot of slack time. Don't get frustrated if you do, because we have it as well, I promise you.
Got a number of questions on this subject. On your deep cranking scenario, reel ratio, what reel are you using from Lew's? And then a couple of questions on using braid with a fluoro leader versus using straight line fluorocarbon. So it just goes back to your crankbait setup. Okay.
All right. First on the reel, that's a Lew's BB1 Pro, 6'2" or 6'4", 6'4" to 1 gear ratio. And I'm telling you guys, the cool thing about that reel is this right here. We talked about length of cast. First of all, I love low profile reels, the Team Lew's Custom Pro, some of the ones that I'm using for different fishing. But you don't want that deep cranking. You've got to have a reel that's really going to have a wide spool, so that when you make that cast and you're getting it out there 70, 80 feet, you're not losing, about 50 yards actually, a lot more than 70, 80, but you don't want to lose your gear ratio. And if you lose all of your line, you may have a 7-1 to 1 or even an 8 to 1, and you don't have much line on there, you've lost all your gear ratio. And then the biggest thing about that reel is the level wind is further, a lot further from where the line comes off the spool than any other reel. And if you think about the science of that, it creates less friction. As that line's coming off the reel and it's real tight, it has to do this. It has to snake back and forth and go back through the same place, where if it's really out here, it don't have to do that much. The snake is a lot smaller. So you don't get that friction of that line coming out, and that's why that's the longest casting reel in the industry. And it's funny, I'm even getting to where I use it on so many other different things now when I'm casting, from a football jig to everything else, just because of how that reel will flat out launch a lure. And then what was the other part to that question, Ross, other than the reel?
The couple guys were asking about using braid with a fluorocarbon leader, or
right.
Just similar to what you're doing with your spinning rod setups and things like that.
Yeah, I love the braid to the fluorocarbon deal in a spinning rod. I don't use it much in a crankbait situation, because as much as I love braided line, it can dig, and you really load up a cast to make a crankbait cast. And if you get a dig at all, it's gonna pop free, or it's gonna really create a mess. Now, we had a tournament at Lake Amistad several years ago where I did use it. I did use some braided line because we were cranking the tops of those trees, and the water was really, those trees were really abrasive, and I had to use the braid to crank it. But I haven't tried the braid to fluorocarbon on the crankbait. I just love throwing the straight core fluorocarbon, but it could be valuable. I'd like to hear, maybe guys send me some messages on Facebook if you're liking that. That's intriguing to me, but I've never done it.
Okay. A couple of questions related on this subject, and it has to do with watercolor during the spawn. People are asking, are you looking for clear water, or are you looking in one instance, Jay was asking her if you're looking for slightly off-colored water.
Mm-hmm. You're always going to have more success fishing in slightly off-colored water. Now, obviously, if you're wanting to sight fish and visibly see bass, the clearer it is, the better. But if you're wanting to fish for them, I like a mix. I like an in-between. I don't like real muddy water, and I don't like real clear water. I like to find an in-between stain, usually about a foot visibility down into the water, and that's when it's magic. Actually, the tournament I won at Okeechobee this past week was the exact scenario. If you get too far out into the lake or places that don't have enough protection, you're going to find really, really dark water, muddy water. And if you get way back in that stuff, you're going to find it being too clear. Being able to get out and find that mixture is magic.
Okay. Got a number of questions. Well, let me touch on this because we got a number of questions on this. And first one is, what's it like leading the tournament on Sunday morning? You got $100,000 on the line. Guys are asking a number of questions about that. Is it more stressful having the lead, or would you rather have been chasing?
Oh, it's definitely more stressful to have the lead. I had my family come down 13 hours away, and I'm thinking, as I'm running back up that rim canal on day 4, I'm not thinking about the financial part. I'm not thinking about the trophy. I'm thinking, man, I don't want to let them down. They come all the way down here. I don't want to lose. But it's definitely more stressful to be in the lead, especially when you got a lead like that and you get down to your primary area and it's toast, But it still was, I still would have rather have the big lead. There's no doubt. If you ask any of the pros, they're going to tell you obviously the same thing. But it definitely is a lot more stressful. And that one was a little bit different. I look at Saturday and losing that 9-pounder, and shortly after losing a 5-pounder, I mean, you're right back in a 27, 28-pound day if you land those 2 fish. And it just so it was easy to look back and second guess, but I wouldn't change anything about how it went. That was probably the coolest moment. If you look for a moment when that weight was called out, that probably moved me in my career as much as anything has, because I had done calculated in my head that I thought Ott had won it, and it was an awesome surprise.
Fantastic. I did have a question on the drone that was above your head on Saturday. Is that distracting? What's that experience like?
The drone? Yeah. I've had the drone come in on me many times in Bassmaster and Major League Fishing events. that one was, I felt like after 10 or 15 minutes was just going to stay there the whole time. And it got to where I'm thinking, and it wasn't that I feel like it was bothering the fish. It was just that constant zzz. When you hear that for 15 minutes, it's just like, okay, they've got their B-roll, enough's enough. But it's all good. Let me say this. Those guys are the best. The media is trained in what they do with BASS. The photographers, the camera guys, they know where to get. They're very sharp. It is very, very seldom that they do anything. And even that situation, I had gone a couple hours without a bite, and I was really focused. And I think had I had more than a live well, I probably would have been a little bit more patient with it. But it was getting to me a little bit. I won't deny it.
Okay. Got another question on your deep cranking setup. It's obviously a very popular subject here tonight. What's your take on your Z-Boss versus your Strike King 8XD or the different ones out there, Tim? What makes you settle on one over the other? All
right. Yeah, that's a good question. I was just thinking about that drone. I almost caught it on one cast and didn't try to. But Strike King makes some great products. I've caught a lot of fish on them myself in the past. Rapala makes some great crankbaits. I like the Z-Boss, which is the picture we're looking at there. To me, it has the most hydrodynamic movement of any crankbait in the industry. It took us over a year to build it. That Z-Boss 20 right there weighs a full ounce. Everything else in its class is around a 3/4 ounce, a 5/8 ounce, things like that. It has a weight transfer, all of the things that allow you to really make it perform at its best. It will outcast anything in its class with the weight of it. The bill is extremely thin. It's kind of like taking a steak knife versus a butter knife. If you see a crankbait that has a real blunt bill, real fat, real thick, it's going to hold up good over time, but it's also when you feel that thump, when you're rolling it in and your rod tip's just jumping all over the place and you're feeling that bass feels that down there as it's coming to him. It's kind of like the scenario of throwing a spinnerbait at a log. And I tell this in my seminars I do all the time. If somebody walks into the backyard of somebody's house, for whatever reason, let's say you're a meter reader or whatever, you're walking into somebody's backyard and you open the gate and you step on the dog's tail that's in the backyard, he's going to turn and snap at you and bite you. It's a reaction deal. You got into his area. You may come back the next day or the next week and slightly open the door and look down and kind of whistle, start calling at the dog, and it comes to you wagging its tail. It's just a different scenario. And when that bass knows, when you throw that spinnerbait at that log and you throw 10 foot past it, about halfway there, he's going to start feeling that on his lateral line. He's going to turn and look, and he's going to say, okay, number 2 Colorado, I'm not going to eat that thing. But a bass sitting down on a ledge is the same way. I don't want that bass to feel that until that lure gets down in that strike zone. And the more hydrodynamic it is, that lure, if you look just above my thumb there, the way the paddle, which is the clear part, the bill, goes into the forehead, is a seamless transition. There's no big blunt area there. You don't see a sports car, another good shot of it there, but there's a great shot of it. But you don't see a sports car go from the hood to the windshield and have it's a smooth transition. And that's what we're trying to do there. And that's what made that lure so hydrodynamic. A lot of people, that Z-Boss 20 there will hit 15 to 17 pretty easily. And you'll throw that crankbait and you think, man, it's not diving. What's wrong? And next thing you know, you're hung up in 15 foot of water. And it's just the softness of it to me that makes it superior. And there's some great products out there. Strike King obviously makes some great ones, as you mentioned there. But that one, dominating on the Tennessee River, Pitwick, and Kentucky Lake. Kentucky Lake is probably our biggest seller for that lure, and that's the most dominant crankbait. You're talking about the best ledge fishermen in the country. If you're talking about local fishermen, weekend warriors that know how to throw crankbaits, Kentucky Lake is the pinnacle. And that is our number one selling location for that lure. Those guys take it serious, and they know what they're looking for. Okay.
Guys, I'm going to give him 2 more questions, and I'm going to get him out of here so he can go spend some time with his family. He's been on the road. I apologize if I didn't get to your question, but we did the best I could to answer a number of them. I did want to circle back on this, Tim. You talked about, losing a 9-pound fish. one gentleman was asking about, and this is just a great thing for those guys, those tournament guys that are out there that are a part of this tonight, club guys, whatever. How do you keep control in those situations when you're either having a frustrating day or you're lost a 9-pounder and you know what's on the line? How can you help those guys maintain control of their mental side of things?
You know, what was going on internally was a whole lot more than what you guys seen on Bass Live. But at the same time, you know, I think if I screamed and pitched a fit, or no matter how much I lost it by losing that fish, it was not going to put that fish back in the boat. There ain't an amount of thinking about it. There ain't an amount of turning to the camera guy and talking about it. There ain't an amount of anything you can do that's going to put that fish back in the boat. The only thing I can control is that next hook set, that next pitch. And here's what I try to do mentally. I try to say, hey, I never made that cast. You know, I never made that cast to that target. I never had that bite. That's the only way to keep moving and keep thinking about it. And I'm not going to lie. I mean, you know, it's easy to get on here to say, man, I just put it aside and went on and had a good day and won the tournament. No, I'm human. You know, I thought about that over and over and what that would have meant if I could have landed that fish. That was by far the biggest fish I hooked in that tournament. It was probably closer to 10 than it was 9. It was filled out. It was just, and I got a good look at it sitting there 2 foot from me as it's going crazy, and had done landed 8-pounders each of the first few days, and the fish was much bigger. But I think the biggest thing is you gotta just keep fishing, keep plugging away. You know, fishing almost becomes just robotic to us out there at times. You know what you're doing. You know what you're pitching to, you know what the plan is, you know what the task is. And if the guys are fishing at home and they're great boat dock fishermen or they're great ledge fishermen, those are going to happen. I haven't had one happen like that in a major tournament I had a chance to win that size. I mean, that was an absolute game changer. And that one shook me pretty good. But like I said, pitching a fit or yelling and just getting all frustrated and is not going to put that fish back in the boat. And I think that's the biggest thing to remember. No matter what happens, your reaction after that moment of that fish swimming off is gone. You got to forget about it and get it out of your mind.
Okay. Really appreciate your time tonight. I'm going to ask you one more question to get you out of here,
right,
Tim. And it's about your television show.
Okay.
Where can the guys find it? It's on NBC Sports Network. I know that. What time, what days, stuff like that. And then also, as a tie-in to this, people are asking, do you find yourself maybe end up doing the television show more and wanting to get out of tournament fishing, or is tournament fishing just a part of who Tim Horton's going to be for the rest of his life?
Yeah, I enjoy it. You know, a funny thing happened to me. I started doing the Bass Pros for Bass Pro Shops. You guys are probably familiar with that show too, with Edwin and Kevin and myself and Stacy and Ott and a bunch of us. But I started doing that television show, I think about 11 years ago. We're either in our 10th or 11th season now. And it really moved me to have people coming up to weigh in and different things and saying, man, I saw that episode and I went out and did it at my lake and it worked. And that moved me. It was gratifying. And I wanted to start my own show, and that led into that. But I enjoy competing as well. I enjoy the guys. You know, I went through a stretch where I didn't catch them as good, obviously, for a while. And there is probably some of that to being spread thin. You know, you can only concentrate so much and have tunnel vision unless you got a lot going on. But I wouldn't trade either one of them. I enjoy both of them too much to not do it. You know, the competitive side with bass and with what Major League Fishing has going now, Major League Fishing having that World Championship coming up and all of that footage on CBS in bass with Bass Live and what it's got going now is unprecedented with the coverage. It's as addicting as daggum funnel cake at State Fair. I'm telling you, man, it is amazing. Yeah, when I don't make the cuts, I cannot quit watching it. But I enjoy both so much. I don't foresee myself quitting. And this was really a shot in the arm for me, you know, to feel the juices. And I told somebody the other day, and this is the truth, I went to Lake Cherokee and had a terrible tournament to start the season. And I told somebody it was one of the best practices I've had in years. And I knew something was feeling different. We had the worst weather in practice. It was cold. It was rainy. And I couldn't wait for the sun to come up. And I hated to get off the water in the evening, even though I didn't find them and I didn't figure them out. I think that's something you can't snap your fingers and create. That's something that comes and goes with different times of your life and different things that you may have going on at home. And man, I was just motivated and feeling it. And that carried on into Lake Okeechobee. You look at the guys in your local lakes, guys. I'm going to tell you this. You look on your home lake, and you're going to find a cycle of guys that are dominating. And it'll happen 2 or 3 years, and then you'll have another guy or two come in, some team tournaments, and they're dominating. And at that moment, at that time on that lake, if those guys aren't doing it, they're thinking about it. When they're at work during the week, they're thinking about what they're going to do on the weekend. And when they get a couple hours out to go practice, they're living it, and it's a part of them. It's a part of their fabric. And when you're feeling that from a tournament fisherman, that's something you can't snap your fingers and create. And that's what I was feeling at Cherokee. And I come home and I told Kim, my wife, I said, it just feels different. Something does. And there we go to Lake Okeechobee, and that happens. It's just a cool deal. It's just a cool feeling, but a good question. And I just love both of them. So
fantastic. Well, we can't thank you enough for being here tonight. On behalf of Bass Pro Shops, Navionics, we can't thank you enough. Ray Marine, we appreciate all of your support and help. Just so you guys understand, this will be up on the Navionics website very shortly, probably about 2 days or so. Timmy is going to have access to it, so maybe he puts it on his YouTube page or whatnot. By all means, please go on Facebook, like Tim Horton Fishing, visit his website, visit his sponsors, help him out, because he's helping you guys out. I really appreciate your time tonight answering all these questions, Tim. Everybody have yourself a fantastic evening, and thank you for your time tonight, Tim.
Hey, thanks all the fans for watching and listening, and thanks Ross for hosting me. I enjoy this as much as they do.
Well, we got a lot of requests for you to come back, so thank you, Tim.
Hey, I'm ready. Okay. Let's do it. Let's do it early summer. We'll get on that deep cranking some more.
There you go. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, buddy.